You ever notice how someone can go from being all in, calling you every night, saying you're their everything, to suddenly treating you like you're a stranger? Like the person who once stared at you like you were magic, now walks past you like you're invisible. And what's worse, they know what they're doing. It's calculated, it's cold. It's this deliberate detachment that hurts more than the silence. You sit there wondering, how could I have ever meant so much, only to now feel like I mean absolutely nothing. Let me tell you something that people don't talk about enough. He acts like you're nothing because you once meant everything. When someone treats you like you're nothing after once making you feel like you were everything, it can leave you spinning. It's confusing, destabilizing, and deeply hurtful. But what's often hidden beneath that drastic shift is something most people don't recognize at first: fear. Deep, unspoken, unresolved fear. Not yours asterisk, theirs asterisk. Because when you meant everything to them, when they felt real emotion, it stirred something within them that was uncomfortable, something they didn't know how to face. And instead of working through it, they shut it down, withdrew, and created emotional distance. People who are emotionally unequipped often mistake intensity for danger. When someone cares deeply, it makes them vulnerable. Vulnerability, for some, is the ultimate threat. It means having something they can't control. It means being seen. It means facing wounds they haven't healed, insecurities they've never named, and truths they're not ready to confront. So what do? They run. They act cold. They rewrite the story in their head so they don't have to feel the discomfort of losing something meaningful. For some, the only way to process real connection is to pretend it never existed. That sounds absurd, but it's how many people cope with emotional overwhelm. If someone doesn't have the tools to handle intimacy, they'll sabotage it. If they don't know how to sit with the fear of being truly known, they'll create distance and detach. The easiest way to escape the anxiety of attachment is to diminish its significance. So they convince themselves, asterisk, you didn't matter as much as it felt like you did, asterisk. They shrink you in their mind, they numb out, and they behave as though you were never that important. Not because it's true, but because it's safer for them to believe that than to admit they lost something real. You might ask, if they were scared, why didn't they just say so? Why not be honest instead of cruel? The answer lies in their conditioning. Many people have never been taught how to communicate their fear. Especially in relationships, fear often shows up as anger, withdrawal, apathy, or detachment. The deeper the emotional bond, the more terrifying it is for someone who's never felt safe being emotionally open. You touched something real in them, and that's exactly why they had to shut it down. It's not that you meant nothing. It's that you meant too much, and they weren't equipped to handle it. So they flipped the script. They became cold, maybe even distant to the point of acting like a stranger. They might have even seemed like a completely different person overnight. That's not because their feelings disappear. It's because they buried them. And what you're seeing now isn't the truth of how they felt, but a reaction to how much they did feel. It's self-protection disguised as indifference. It's emotional cowardice dressed up as strength. It's not about you being forgettable. It's about you being unforgettable, and that being too much for them to sit with. When you meant everything, it forced them to look at themselves in a way they weren't ready for. You forced them to ask, asterisk, am I capable of showing up for something real, asterisk, and when the answer was no, they couldn't just admit that. So instead, they rewrote the story to place the blame elsewhere. They acted like it didn't matter. Because to act like it mattered would mean facing their own limitations, their own brokenness, and their own fear. And that kind of honesty isn't something everyone is brave enough to handle. Emotional immaturity often shows up in ways that are subtle at first, but painfully obvious in hindsight. It doesn't always look like yelling or manipulation. It can look like silence, like distance, like acting unbothered when they know they're hurting you. One of the most common ways emotionally immature people cope with regret is by pretending it doesn't exist. They cover it up with indifference. They bury it beneath avoidance. And instead of dealing with what they feel, they act like they feel nothing at all. That's not strength, that's fear in disguise. And it plays out over and over again in relationships where someone walks away not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to handle the fact that they do. When someone regrets how they treated you, or regrets losing you, but doesn't have the emotional maturity to process it, they'll often pretend it was meaningless. They may make passive-aggressive comments, act like you never mattered, or even go out of their way to seem unaffected. But it's not because they've truly moved on. It's because they don't know how to take responsibility. To own regret, you have to be willing to admit you messed up, that you hurt someone, that you lost something valuable because of your own choices. And not everyone is capable of facing that truth, especially if it challenges how they see themselves. People who lack emotional depth struggle with self-awareness. They don't reflect on their actions. They don't ask themselves, what could I have done better? Instead, they look for ways to escape the discomfort. They rewrite the story in a way that makes them feel better. Maybe they blame you. Maybe they tell themselves the relationship wasn't that serious. Maybe they pretend they were never really invested in the first place. Because to acknowledge the truth that you mattered, that they miss you, that they feel the absence of your presence, would be to confront a part of themselves they don't want to see. So instead, they hide behind a mask of detachment. This kind of behavior is confusing because it makes you question your own memory of the relationship. You start wondering if you imagined the connection, if you made it all up in your head. You didn't. What you experienced was real, but what they're doing now isn't real. It's a defense mechanism. It's them avoiding the pain by pretending there never was any. It's emotional immaturity showing up in the form of emotional distance. Sometimes they'll even try to convince others that they've moved on, that they're fine, that losing you didn't affect them. They'll distract themselves with temporary attention, with superficial connections, with busy schedules and empty words. But deep down, they know they didn't handle things the right way. They know they didn't honor the relationship or the feelings involved. And they carry that regret silently, hidden under layers of pretense. The tragedy is not just that they lost you, it's that they're too emotionally stunted to admit that it was a loss at all. When someone doesn't have the tools to face regret, they numb it, they bury it under ego, they reject the idea that they could be at fault. That's why apologies rarely come from these types of people. Not because they don't feel sorry, but because saying sorry requires vulnerability. It requires humility. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths, and emotional immaturity avoids all of that. Instead of owning what they did, they act cold, distant, unfeeling, but it's not a reflection of their actual emotional state. It's a mask they wear to avoid shame, guilt, and the vulnerability of being wrong. And while they may look unaffected on the outside, that emotional avoidance eventually catches up to them in ways they can't ignore forever when someone you care deeply for starts treating you like you're invisible, like you're irrelevant. It can shake your sense of self. You begin to question your worth, wondering if somehow you became less lovable overnight. But that assumption comes from a dangerous place, one that confuses someone else's behavior with your own value. The truth is, your worth was never tied to how they treated you. their inability to appreciate you, to nurture the connection, to stay consistent. None of that means you were lacking. It means they couldn't see what they had, or they saw it and didn't know what to do with it. That's not on you. That's on them. One of the most important things to understand in relationships is that someone's failure to love you well does not equal proof that you are unlovable. A person can mishandle something precious simply because they don't know how to handle anything with care. You can offer your heart to someone with all the sincerity and openness in the world, and they can still walk away. Not because you're not enough, but because they were never prepared to receive something real. Sometimes people don't have the capacity for what you bring, and instead of admitting that, they project it onto you. They make you feel like you were the problem. But it's not a reflection of your value, it's a reflection of their limits. People will often try to cope with their shortcomings by shifting the narrative. Instead of acknowledging they failed to meet you where you were, they'll paint you as too much, too intense, too emotional, too invested. But that's not the truth. That's a defense. They couldn't rise to your level, so they tried to lower you to theirs. Because it's easier for them to diminish you than to confront their own inadequacies. And if you're not grounded in your own sense of worth, it's easy to start believing that maybe you were too much. Maybe you did ask for too much. Maybe you should have held back, cared less, been more detached. But that would be the real loss, not losing them, but losing yourself in the aftermath of being devalued. The reality is, you were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. You were offering love to someone who wasn't ready to receive it. And when someone isn't ready, they'll often treat your value like a burden instead of a gift. But just because they couldn't carry it doesn't mean it wasn't worth carrying. There's a difference between being too much and being too much for them. And once you begin to understand that distinction, their rejection starts to lose its power. You begin to see that your worth isn't something that can be validated or invalidated by another person. It simply is independent, constant, unshakable. People who don't see your value will always try to make you question it. Not because you're not valuable, but because if they admitted your worth, they'd have to face the fact that they couldn't meet it. That's a hard pill to swallow, so they pretend you were easy to walk away from. They act like you were replaceable. They try to reduce you to a chapter they've closed, but deep down, they know what they lost. They know they encountered something real. And if they ever do the inner work, they'll have to sit with that truth. But you don't need to wait for their realization. Because your value isn't on hold, waiting for someone else to recognize it. It's alive in you, regardless of who chooses to see it. And it stays with you, no matter who walks away when someone emotionally detaches from you and starts acting cold or dismissive. It can feel like an erasure of everything you shared. It's confusing how someone who once made you feel like the center of their world suddenly behaves like they never even knew you. But what often gets overlooked in the pain of that shift is this. Walking away or discarding someone isn't always a sign of strength or peace, but rather a mechanism to avoid vulnerability. Many people who walk away without explanation, who act indifferent and unmoved, are not doing so out of clarity. They're doing it because they can't tolerate the discomfort that comes with feeling deeply exposed. When someone truly feels something real and intense, but doesn't know how to process it, they might run from it. Not because it wasn't meaningful, but because it was. That kind of intensity pulls up old fears, unresolved wounds, and internal chaos they've worked hard to suppress. To face it would mean admitting they've got work to do, and instead of doing that work, they project the discomfort outward. They shut down, they detach, and by emotionally discarding you, they try to regain a sense of control. It's not that they didn't feel it's that they felt too much and didn't have the emotional tools to cope. This kind of detachment is deeply manipulative, even when it's not intentional. It leaves the other person questioning their own memory, their own experience. You start to wonder if you imagined the whole thing, the closeness, the late-night conversations, the vulnerability. But you didn't. What's happening isn't an honest withdrawal, it's a retreat driven by fear, fear of emotional depth, fear of needing someone, fear of being seen without the armor of indifference. And rather than confront those fears, they choose the easier path, emotional exile. For many, showing indifference is a form of self-protection. It gives the illusion of strength. If they can appear unaffected, they don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to be accountable. They don't have to feel shame or guilt for the damage left behind. But pretending not to care doesn't erase the reality of what was shared. It just delays the consequences of that avoidance. Because emotional detachment doesn't eliminate the truth. It just suppresses it until it resurfaces in another form. Usually as regret, sometimes as self-sabotage. Eventually, it becomes a pattern that follows them into every relationship they enter. Discarding someone to avoid vulnerability may seem like a clean break, but it's actually a messy escape. It's cutting ties to avoid emotional discomfort, not to find healing or closure. And while it might bring temporary relief to the person walking away, it leaves deep confusion for the person left behind. That confusion, though, is not a reflection of who you are. It's the residue of someone else's emotional immaturity. They couldn't handle the responsibility of real connection, so they fled from it. They couldn't risk being seen, so they erased the space where they were known. This isn't about deserving the cold shoulder or being worthy of abandonment. It's about how someone else's fear of vulnerability made them choose emotional self-preservation over mutual growth. That's not strength, it's retreat. It's not clarity, it's chaos masked as certainty. And the worst part is that this behavior often masquerades as healing. They tell themselves they're protecting their peace, when in reality, they're just avoiding their pain. Emotional detachment becomes a coping strategy, not a sign of resolution. And every time they leave a connection this way, they reinforce the fear that vulnerability equals danger, that closeness means risk, and that letting someone in will only end in loss. There's a moment after someone has treated you like you don't matter when you're tempted to reach out, to explain yourself, to prove your value to them. You want to make them see what they've walked away from. You imagine the perfect text, the right words, the ideal scenario where they finally get it, where they realize they made a mistake and come back, remorseful and changed. But chasing clarity from someone who chose confusion only takes more from you. The moment someone starts acting like you're replaceable, the most powerful thing you can do isn't to argue or beg or try to make them understand. It's to walk away with your dignity intact. Real strength is not found in trying to rewrite someone's perception of you. It's in knowing who you are and standing firm in that truth, even when someone else can't or won't see it. Dignity isn't loud. It's quiet, steady, unwavering. It's choosing not to fight for a seat at a table where you're no longer being served with respect. It's recognizing that your energy, your love, your presence are too valuable to be given to someone who treats them like an option. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect. That's maturity. And it takes courage to choose that kind of stillness over desperation. When someone treats you with indifference, it creates an ache to correct the narrative. You don't want to be misunderstood. You don't want to be the villain in someone else's story. But trying to fix their version of events only leads you further away from your own healing. Because no amount of explanation will change someone's heart if they've already decided to close it. You could present every memory, every moment of vulnerability, every good intention, and it still wouldn't penetrate a person who's emotionally shut off. And in the process of trying, you end up shrinking yourself. You trade your peace for their validation. You abandon your dignity to feel temporarily less rejected. But dignity is what anchors you when everything else is spinning. It's the part of you that remembers your worth when someone else forgets it. It's what allows you to walk away not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself too much to stay where you're not valued. That kind of strength isn't easy. It requires silence when your ego wants to speak. It demands restraint when your emotions want to react. And it involves trust. Trust that walking away without closure doesn't mean the story isn't resolved, but that you're choosing to write the ending on your own terms. There's a misconception that power comes from proving someone wrong. That if they see you thriving, if they see you glowing without them, they'll feel the regret, and that will somehow make you feel whole again. But that's not healing. That's revenge in disguise. True healing is when you no longer need them to understand what they lost. You no longer need the apology, the acknowledgement, the validation. You've already given those things to yourself. And the moment you do that, you free yourself from the emotional contract that was keeping you stuck. Dignity doesn't chase, it doesn't explain, it doesn't beg. It simply moves forward, not because you're heartless, but because your heart has limits too. And protecting your peace is not selfish, it's wise. It's choosing your future over a past that already showed you its limits. When you stop chasing clarity from the person who gave you confusion, you start creating clarity within yourself. And that becomes your power. Not how they remember you, not whether they come back, but how deeply you choose to honor your own worth when they didn't. The truth is, being treated like you're nothing after meaning everything is one of the most painful experiences you can go through, but it's not the end of your story. It's a revelation. A moment of clarity that shows you who is capable of love, who hides behind fear, and most importantly, who you are when no one is clapping for you. You begin to understand that their distance wasn't proof of your inadequacy. It was proof of their emotional limitations. You stop internalizing their silence and start listening to your own inner voice. The one that says you were real, you were sincere, and you were brave enough to show up fully. You no longer beg for recognition from someone who was never ready to see you. Instead, you rise not for revenge, not for validation, but because dignity, worth, and peace live inside you, not in their approval. What they lost isn't your responsibility to remind them of. What you choose to become now is yours alone to define.